Hey everybody, Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the extraordinary honor of chatting with the most awarded bass player in the history of the International Bluegrass Music Association, Grammy-nominated upright bass player, educator, singer, so much more, Missy Raines. Yay!
Hey.
So Missy, there's so many exciting things to talk about, and I've been listening to bluegrass music. You're involved so intrinsically in so much of it, so definitely want to talk about that. But we always like to go to the past. How did you get started in music, and particularly on bass?
My folks were already bluegrass enthusiasts and early country music enthusiasts when I was born. And so they'd already been going out to hear live music as entertainment. But I grew up in a very rural part of the country in northeastern West Virginia. So, I sort of got dragged along to events early on, since I can remember, seeing live music played, being around a lot of other musicians. They would have neighborhood picking jams and that sort of thing. So I started playing piano first because there was a piano in the house. It belonged to my grandmother, and she gave it to one of my brothers, and started playing piano. And then I wanted to play guitar, and then I never thought about the bass, to be honest. It never even occurred to me. I don't think up until a certain point in my life I'd been close to an actual bass, but my dad had decided, he wasn't really a musician before that, but he had decided he wanted to play bass with some friends who were playing, and he went and, very also out of character for him, made some sort of impulsive buy. And I say that because apparently he did not check this with my mom, and just bought this bass and came home, and my mom's first words were, "What have you done?" And it was also very beautiful because I remember I'm looking at both of them and I could see the smile in my mom's eyes. She was quite pleased, but they were being very cute about it. Anyway, he brought this bass into the house, and when you're a kid, and there's a new instrument, you're curious and you're fearless. And so I started to mess around with it. And that was kind of the beginning of it, because from that point on, I kind of forgot about the other instruments a little bit and wanted to play the bass.
Nice. And did you pursue formal education? Are you self-taught?
Yeah, I self-taught for the most part. I mean, I'd never had formal education. I watched a lot of folks in person. I listened to a lot of records, and every now and then I'd get some good guidance from a few players that I would stalk and ask questions of. And unfortunately, I'm pretty self-taught. Even about 10 or 15 years later, I started to learn to read music, and that was all self-taught too. Because of course, when I was playing piano, I was on that path of learning to play music. But because I kind of gave it up, there went the music part of it. Very, very stupidly, I thought, I'm going to play bluegrass. It's all, learned by ear. I don't need to learn how to read music. You don't have to read, but had I been all grown up and knowledgeable, I would have made myself continue to read music, but I didn't.
Part of the thing that's kind of interesting, I think, with music is that so much of it was not written, especially when you get back to a lot of the older music, because it was happening in a social setting where it was a small group of people. It was kind of a jam, and things happened spontaneously. And it's, there was that growth within that same environment, And so even a lot of the old jazz, it wasn't transcribed. You came and you memorized the chart, or you improvised your part, and that was as good as it got. And some amazing things came out of that because it was in such a less rigid format. Now, again, I'm certainly not against written music, because there are situations where you go, okay, if you're going to sit in a Broadway pit and there's all this complicated stuff, it's not like you just go, okay, ad-lib whatever you can there. That would be bad. But, it is, I think, something that historically has happened. And I really also appreciate your mention of records, because I think a lot of young people today seem to think of those ancient things they see sometimes used as decorations on the wall, but that was the tool we had at the time. And the painstaking moments you had to lift the needle and put it and lift it and put it back and lift it and put it back, to hear the same track over and over and over again, which ended up with a fair amount of scratched records. So our favorites were a little more damaged because we had wanted to work them so consistently, and there was no slowing it down. You had to pick up on time. And so there was a fine art to that as well. So I very much appreciate that. So as you progressed and you were learning, how did you decide to kind of go, because you've made your whole life out of this? How did that entry into the business happen?
It wasn't exactly planned, but I was obsessed with playing music once I started playing bass and really getting into that, and I started playing with bands. I was still in school, like not grade school, but high school, middle school, and high school. All through my high school years, I played with bands on the weekends and played in places, oftentimes bars and that sort of thing, that I wasn't old enough to actually be in. But, it was pretty low key, and I was always with adults and responsible adults. So that was okay. But that had become the natural thing for me to do. It's just the whole idea of a gig, just going to a gig and playing. That rhythm became very natural. And then so that when I graduated from high school, and I think when I looked at my parents and said, I don't want to go to college, I think, honestly, they probably were a little relieved because, they didn't have the money anyway. So, but they would have made it happen if I had really wanted it. But I didn't. I just wanted to play music. And so I left and tried out a couple cities and found a band that I really loved and started a life in another town and started playing with some, folks that were really serious about playing. And so honestly, I don't know. I'd like to say I had it all planned and that I could see what the future was going to be, but I didn't, of course. If I had known kind of how hard it was going to be, I probably still would have done it, but I might have been a little bit more afraid. But I wasn't afraid. I was just kind of like, this is what I want to do, and I can't imagine doing anything else. And so, through the years, of course, I've had to modify, and which means some years in the early days, you do other jobs to make it work when you're not making enough money to play by playing music. Then you just kind of fit something else in so that you can afford to do what it is that you're loving to do. And I think that's probably a pretty natural path for a lot of folks who are building a business or building a life. So I did that for sure. And I met my husband, and we had similar desires and goals, and made a choice together that we wanted to pursue our artistic ideals. And so that also meant it's like, okay, so we won't be driving new cars probably, and all those things.
You make a very good point where, as part of, again, the music business is challenging, and it does involve a lot of flexibility and kind of diversification. So again, that kind of falls into where you've been involved as an educator. Again, I remember when you first kind of came on to the Artist Works scene, which has been quite a while, but you were like the go-to. You want to learn this kind of music, Missy is the person. How did you get involved with education?
Well, a good 12 or so years before I joined Artist Works, I had officially started teaching at music camps or workshops all over the country and abroad. And so I had started doing that. In the very, very beginning, I didn't know really exactly what I was doing. I just, got asked to do it, and you say yes, and you figure it out as you go along. But then I would do at least 3 or 4 camps a year, every year after that. And that was like sometime around 1998 or so. And, camps might be 3 or 4 days or 5 days or something like that. You have a class full of students, most often adults, and their levels are always vary. You have beginners and more intermediates and that sort of thing, all in the same room. So you have to figure out how to make that work. So a lot of it was just, in the heat of battle, I just learned how to do it. And I really do enjoy teaching. It's something that I particularly love to help people, and I love it when the light bulb goes off, and I love seeing the joy that they get out of playing, and I love trying to help them when they think that it's hard or impossible or that they can't do it, and then trying to help them see that they can. So that feels really good. So I do love it. I love performing more than teaching, but I do love it. So I just started doing it, and then when ArtistWorks decided they wanted to expand their bluegrass offerings, I got a pretty great recommendation from Tony Trischka. They, well, who do we get to bass in this class? And he suggested me, and he had been the one who had started the first bluegrass, like he was the first banjo teacher for ArtistWorks. So that went a long way. So I'm very indebted to Tony for speaking up for me.
And you really do have to love being an educator, especially if you're dealing with your entry-level students, because it is sometimes, I'm going to say, painful. I've spoken to quite a few people that go, well, if I have them come in, they forgot their notebook again, or they didn't make any time to practice, and so nothing has happened since we talked the last time. So it requires just a wealth of patience and kindness and perseverance. And, I think the realization that music may not be a career for everybody, but everybody can benefit from music in their life as an educational thing, whether it makes them a more rounded individual, culturally speaking, but they've seen all the studies about mathematical and analytical skills that can come with timing and things from music. So it is of great value to everyone, whether they decide to be a professional or not. So that's just great. And you've done so much work of your own. Again, you've got so many albums. I understand you've got a new one coming out here pretty soon. There was Highlander in 2024. You've got a new one coming out in May. Tell us a bit about that project.
Yeah, the brand new album is called Love and Trouble. And it's an absolute follow-up to Highlander, which came out last February, in that it's same 5 people with just a few guests, which was the premise of Highlander. But this new album, and it's pretty straight ahead, what I would call hardcore bluegrass, but hopefully sounding a bit fresh, and some original songs on it, some songs that we picked out of old, more obscure vaults. And it's just sort of a second follow-up to Highlander, in that this band that I've been working with and traveling with now for about 3 years, 3.5 years, the synchronicity is really strong with us, and the vibe is really good, and I wanted to quickly capture that again. You never know what's going to happen down the road, and so it was a quick turnaround for me. In the old days, back when we were making albums, I think there was kind of a rhythm to making a record every year. I didn't have my own band back in those days, but I was a part of that whole scene a lot. But then as I started making my own albums with different bands and what have you, I saw other people make a record every year, but I usually take a little longer in between. So this was out of character for me, just to go right back in the studio and hit out another one. But it felt really good. I'm glad it's over.
Nice. Well, and you're also one of these unique individuals because you both sing and play simultaneously. And again, I am very one track. If I do one or the other, if you want me to sing, I'll sing. If you want me to play, I can play. But both at the same time are kind of right brain, left brain functions. How do you manage that?
Oh my gosh. Well, that's been a whole thing. When I first started playing bass, like I said, when I was out sort of in my first bands at 18, 19 years old, making a living on my own, I really wasn't singing much. And I wanted to sing, but I hadn't like broken through the self-confidence thing and all that. So I didn't really start singing lead and really sort of fronting that sort of thing until I was in my 40s, which is quite late, I think. Now, like I said, I'd done some singing up to that point in with other people, harmony parts, maybe a lead or something, but it wasn't until I started playing as a duo with a really great guitarist named Jim Hurst. And during that time, it's 2 people, bass, guitar. We were up front, and I had to sing, and I wanted to, but it was a great opportunity for me. So, yeah, that whole thing of playing and singing, it really kicks your butt. And so I've thought, and this is something that I've also tried to teach through the years with my students. And, I have just gone after some of the greatest players that I know who play bass and sing. One of them is definitely part of the bluegrass world, maybe not necessarily completely bluegrass, but it's John Cowan, who plays with the Newgrass Revival. Mm-hmm. He plays electric bass and sings. He's one of the lead singers for when the Newgrass Revival was touring. And I talked to him a lot about how to do it. You basically you just have to separate them and learn one, and then you learn the other, and then you bring them back together. That's the only way I know how to do it now. And I still, after all this time, I will still find myself trying to do it all together at the same time. Mm-hmm. And it never works as well as if I just learn to sing it, and then I learn to play it, and then I learn it together.
Well, and I would think one of the challenges, because especially with bass playing and you have that percussive element, you may have moments when you're playing notes to complement the melody that aren't on the melody. So you're doing the coloring. And so like guitar players, especially rhythm guitar players, you're playing chords, you can sing a melody over that because you're both keeping time and staying within that realm. But with those little counter bits where you're putting in a note here and a note there, but your mouth is saying this other thing, that's where I kind of go, okay, that's getting a little too complicated, but that's very cool.
Yeah. It's fraught with those kinds of things.
So another thing that we always like to talk a little bit about is gear. Now, because you're an upright player, most of the upright players, because of the size constraints, don't have gear acquisition syndrome, where you don't have a house full of uprights because you'd have nowhere for yourself. But I keep seeing what appears to be your very tried and true bass. Tell us a little bit about how you're getting your sound and what you're playing on.
Yeah, so my go-to bass is actually the bass that my dad brought home that first day a long time ago.
Wow.
Yeah, because I'm sure he didn't realize what he had bought. None of us did at the time, but he'd gotten a 1937 K bass. It's a plywood, but it's one of, if you're familiar with K, which was an American company that they were making instruments in believe Kalamazoo, Michigan at the time. And they were making plywood basses that ended up being quite lovely instruments, and 37 was like the first year that they made these basses. So he just stumbled upon a really nice bass, and I kept it, because I lost my father when he was only 52, and so he died very young. So I was going to keep the bass anyway, but it turned out that it just became this bass that I really wanted to play. I've played a few other basses through the years, and I have other basses, but yeah, that's what I'm playing. Now, I did stop flying with it because I kept breaking it.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they did really fairly well with it over the scheme of things, but I just got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm not going to fly with this anymore. Just not going to do that, take the risk. But I do everywhere I drive, then I take it. And then I got another bass that, it's not a 37, but it's 1940 K, and I made it into a conversion. So I, made it so you could had a luthier take off the neck and then insert a bolt so that it can be put back on, and it becomes now two pieces, and you can put it in a Chadwick case. And then you just have the neck to carry. And I also own a Chadwick, but I prefer my other K to fly with. So I use that. Those are the instruments that I'm mostly touring with and recording with. And then I use an ear trumpet Nadine microphone on those, both of those. And then in addition, though, I also use a Fishman full circle pickup. So it's a combination of the two. And the pickup, which I love the full circle, but it's really just there just in case, the mic is just too much in the setting or whatever. So that's what I'm doing mostly. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I've spoken with somebody, and we had the great pleasure to visit the factory where they make the nadines in Portland, Oregon. So,
Yeah.
kind of a fun little tidbit there. And I believe it was the fellow there that was saying that supposedly the ideal placement for miking uprights is two microphones at about a 45-degree angle, about 3 feet away from them. However, that would mean you'd have to stay perfectly static during your entire performance. So that is not a practical. That's why they came up with the Nadine, because they figured, well, people are going to move, so we have to make something that will work well with that. So that's very cool. Looking ahead, do you have any? You have some tour dates coming up. What's in the works for the future?
Yeah, we start out to promote this new album April 24th, and we start out in Virginia. Basically, the tour dates go into August with a pretty solid run up the East Coast, starting April 24th into like May 6th. And then there's a bunch of events in May, and then lots of festivals in June and July and August. So we're excited about that.
Nice. And if people want to know where you're going to be, probably again, because they'll go, when they see this, they may go, okay, where is Missy now? Where would the best place to look? More on social media or at missyraines.com?
Well, probably MissyRaines.com, and my tour page is going to always be updated with all the places. But we'd love to have folks also follow us on social media, because there's always something there typically. And so that's, we're on Facebook and Instagram. Yeah, MissyRaines.com, and you'll be able to find all the latest shows and everything that we have posted there.
Well, Missy, we appreciate you taking time to share all of your story with us and your journey, and certainly looking forward to new music. As always, whenever I hear bluegrass, I can't help myself. I just feel happier. So it's just a wonderful thing that you're bringing to all of us, because certainly we could all use some happiness at any given time. So we greatly appreciate your work and your music. Folks, you've seen her here on Bass Musician Magazine, Missy Raines.
Thank you so much, Raul. It's wonderful to talk with you today.